corridor between Minneapolis and the Oak Park Heights, Bayport, and Stillwater area, what we'll kind of refer to as the greater Stillwater area sometimes, as well as for better transit around the greater Stillwater area itself. So Commissioner Creasel and the county board tasked us with finding out whether it is feasible to bring transit out to the greater Stillwater area and improve transit options in the Highway 36 corridor. And if so, what the general look, feel, and cost of that might be. So the purpose of this study is to identify transit needs and recommendations that reflect the corridor today, what we anticipate for the future. And as part of the study, we were considering transit and transit facilities that would provide alternative travel options for folks throughout the Highway 36 corridor. Before we move on, I do want to note that we didn't go into the study with any particular transit solution in mind. And the study is not necessarily determining what is going to happen. It is just looking at what is feasible, which is really the first step toward any transit improvements in the corridor. The study was led by Emily, myself, and our project consultants in coordination with the project management team, which had members from Washington, Ramsey, and Hennepin County, as well as MnDOT and the Met Council. The process also featured ongoing coordination with 2 technical advisory working groups, or TOGs. The city TOG consisted of a staff representative from each city along the 36 corridor, and the operations TOG had a staff representative from MnDOT, Metro Transit, and Washington County's Community Services. And here I just want to shout out Eric Johnson. He was an active participant representing Oak Park Heights in meetings and helped review the deliverables as they came up and get the word out about the study. So thank you for that. I won't get into all the study goals here in detail, but when we were developing the goals, we wanted them to be goals that would address the issues identified during earlier phases of the study. And we know that when we think about the future, we need to be sensitive to existing context. So we recognize that there's a lot of growth planned in the corridor, but that some communities prioritize their existing character and do not anticipate changing much. So we wanted to ensure that that was captured in the goals as well. We'll get a little bit into the public engagement here. While COVID changed most of our initial engagement plans, we were able to shift to a lot of online engagement. We conducted things like virtual focus groups, we hosted and attended virtual meetings, and we created digital content like self-guided presentations and fact sheets that we distributed through our city partners like Eric Johnson. And one of the key ways that we were able to reach people living, working, or going to school in the Highway 36 corridor was through online questionnaires, which yielded over 1,200 responses, which at least for us is rather a lot. And we wanted to learn about people's pre-COVID travel and transit habits, what their interest in transit is, and why they may or may not be taking transit today. And we've tried to summarize all that engagement into the following 3 bullet points. Which are that the questionnaire revealed that 73% of respondents are interested in taking transit. This wasn't once or twice a year for a Twins game. Folks were indicating that they were interested in taking it up to 5 times a week for things like work, for recreation, for commerce and shopping. So they were interested in incorporating it more into their lifestyle. That of more importance to folks, of most importance to folks in the corridor were traffic congestion along Highway 36, improving mobility for people who rely on transit, and improving the convenience of traveling without a car in this corridor. And then in both focus groups and questionnaires, 2 needs emerged, and there's that need for east-west travel throughout the Highway 36 corridor and that connection to the larger transit network. But there was also a need for travel within the greater Stillwater area. So we'll start to get into some transit scenarios here that we looked at. But before we do, I do want to review the different types of transit service that we looked at during the study. And again, we haven't locked in any particular type of service yet, but what you see on this slide have all informed what has become a suite of transit options and the recommendations that have emerged. So the first one, bus rapid transit, or BRT as we typically call it. It's a higher amenity, higher investment transit option that operates as sort of a hybrid between light rail and your standard bus route. It either operates in mixed traffic or in its own designated lane. It is typically all day, frequently bidirectional service that has infrequent station locations that's designed to move lots of people quickly. This next one is express buses. That's your typical park and ride service that you're probably familiar with. They operate primarily during peak morning and afternoon periods, and they're really designed to serve commuters at the start or end of their work shifts. Then there's local express buses, which are more like your regular route bus service, but with more spacing between stops. They have fewer amenities, but then because of that, they're also more flexible in their service timing and stop spacing. And then this last one, on-demand public transit. This is an emerging service type that is gaining a lot of traction both nationally and locally. And it refers to a type of service that will respond on call and travel anywhere within a set geographic region, sometimes even providing door-to-door service. And this is something that we're going to get into a little bit more here on the next slide. So recall that there are those two needs that I mentioned that emerged during the study. There's the need for east-west travel throughout the Highway 36 corridor, and then the need for travel within the greater Stillwater area. On-demand public transit was identified as a potential recommendation to better meet that second need, that travel within the Oak Park Heights, Bayport, and Stillwater area. And it's not a perfect analogy, but some people think of on-demand public transit as dial-a-ride meets Uber or Lyft. And it's really been carving a niche for itself as a transit solution for areas that need transit, but where fixed route options have not been successful and are not necessarily sustainable long-term. There's no formal route that it circulates. Instead, communities designate a specific service area and users can request a ride via app, website, or phone call. So looking at the screen right now, you see like there's a little bit of a blue kidney shape around the Stillwater, Oak Park Heights, Bayport area. That's just an example of a service area that could be developed for something like on-demand public transit. Unlike the Uber or Lyft comparisons, these vehicles are ADA compliant and will sometimes pool riders. They can accommodate bikes or other mobility devices, and there are no price surges, meaning that the fare is reliable. There are also more reliable hours of service and more accountability with the drivers. So with the stage properly set, I will walk you through the transit scenarios that we looked at. There are 4 transit scenarios, 3 of which include all the transit types that we just talked about. BRT, that bus rapid transit, is the green line. Commuter Express, the Commuter Express bus is the dotted yellow line. Local Express bus is the purple line. And then that on-demand public transit is that, like I said, that blue kidney shape there on the end. And the 4 scenarios vary primarily by where the eastern terminus of that bus rapid transit is located. So for example, here in transit scenario 1, BRT would run from downtown Minneapolis through the University of Minnesota, up Highway 280 to Highway 36, and then stop at Rice Street. At Rice Street, there would be a connection to that local express bus service type that would then connect out to the Oak Park Heights, Bayport, Stillwater area. And then to address that peak period commuter need, a commuter express would run from the greater Stillwater area directly to downtown Minneapolis. And then an on-demand public transit service area would be established around that Oak Park Heights, Bayport, Stillwater area to serve the travel needs within that area and also to connect folks to other transit options. Transit scenario 2 only differs from transit scenario 1 in where that eastern terminus is. So that eastern terminus of the BRT is moved from Rice Street to Maplewood Mall, but all other aspects of this transit scenario are the same. Likewise, in transit scenario 3, that eastern terminus is moved from Maplewood Mall to Hadley Avenue. The only other difference here is you'll notice that the BRT does not go along 280. It goes directly 36 to 35W, and that's because in preliminary analysis, the further east you go in the 36 corridor, the less of a connection there is to the University of Minnesota. So we just wanted to test out what that would look like to maybe go 35 instead of 280. And then this last scenario differs from the others in that it only includes BRT and on-demand public transit. And that's because, in this scenario, the BRT is going all the way from Minneapolis, all the way up to Stillwater. And in that case, it'd be a little redundant to run that commuter express and the local express as well. So this is a little bit more of a streamlined option. But it does include that on-demand public transit aspect as well. So these are the 4 scenarios that we're looking at. And again, I just want to be clear that, none of these are being advanced as a preferred alternative to move forward to engineering. These scenarios were all developed to test for feasibility of transit in the corridor and to really be compared against each other as to which ones perform best in terms of ridership and cost. So one of the ways we evaluate these scenarios is through developing and comparing ridership forecasts, operations and maintenance costs, and capital costs. And this is where we really start to put numbers to some of these scenarios. And what we found was that all 4 scenarios are actually very comparable to each other. Looking at this chart here, you'll notice across the top, you'll see the different scenarios that we talked about. Down the left side of the chart, you'll see the different evaluation measures. And just starting with ridership, while ridership varied slightly by scenario, in the transit world, these are all still quite comparable. And you can see that there's really a fair amount of overlap in the ridership forecast ranges. So one of the key takeaways here is that, while scenario 2 has the highest projected ridership, there's not one scenario that is clearly head and shoulders above the rest. They all feature ridership within a similar margin. And that's really the story across all these metrics. With regard to operations and maintenance costs, we also see a lot of similarity. Generally, the further east the BRT goes, the higher the O&M costs. But again, we see that no scenario is really head and shoulders more expensive than another. And then when we talk about capital cost estimations, that includes things like right-of-way, buses, stations, and associated infrastructure. And these aren't final costs, but they're used just to get an order of magnitude, like what are we talking about cost-wise here? And again, it's the same story. All 4 scenarios are really very comparable to each other when broken out like this. But the heart at the center of our study was our transit improvements along Highway 36 between the greater Stillwater area and downtown Minneapolis feasible? And the answer is yes. We see that transit investment along the Highway 36 corridor is feasible. We see that specifically BRT, that higher level investment along the Highway 36 corridor is feasible. We see that transit investment all the way out to Stillwater is feasible. And so then the question arises, which scenario is best? And the answer is we don't know. And I can understand that may be dissatisfying, but it wasn't really the goal of the study to identify a scenario to advance. The goal was really to determine whether transit in the corridor could be feasible and get some early evaluation numbers to put to that. Identifying a preferred scenario for the corridor would come in future phases and would also include more opportunities for the Highway 36 communities to participate. So with that, I'll hand it off to Emily here to walk through some of our recommendations.
Great, thanks, Joe. Let's go to the next slide. Perfect. So your head might be swimming. We showed you a bunch of maps with different comparisons of different transit types. We talked about on-demand public transit, and then we told you that they were all essentially the same. So you may be kind of wondering, what are we doing here, and what is the county up to? So before we get to our recommendations, which will be laid out kind of chronologically, we felt it was really important, as we talk to our corridor partners, that we kind of acknowledge the context that we're all operating in and all of the challenges that we're having right now, and including the challenges that impacted even conducting the study. So starting with COVID-19, we know that there are still going to be financial challenges and constraints. That's for the county, that's for all the counties, that's for our city partners, that's for the state, it's worldwide. We know that there's going to be uncertain changes to the transit market. So it might be a little funny right now that we're talking about transit at a time when folks are just beginning to get comfortable going back to transit, right? For the past year or so, it's been, please take your car, please walk, please don't be near other people. And here we are talking about transit. Another challenge that would be ahead of us is county participation. So while this is a good priority for Washington County, we have to acknowledge that this Washington County was the only funding partner for this study. And moving forward, we would want to see some more participation from Hennepin and Ramsey, but they have their own competing transit priorities right now. Washington County also has the Gold Line, which we're working on delivering. Ramsey County has Rush Line, which is not far behind Gold Line. So there's a lot going on in the transit world, which leads us to our partners at Met Council and Metro Transit, who have their own financial constraints, their own competing transit priorities. So when we pulled together all of our recommendations, we wanted to acknowledge kind of the challenges that are ahead of us and our partners, as well as all of the unknowns, which really helped us to kind of form all of our future asks and when we want to ask them, and being strategic and sensitive to what's going on in folks' lives. So let's move to our next slide. So we'll start with our near-term recommendations. And as I said, all of our recommendations are ordered chronologically. So near-term is a 0 to 2 year time frame. And really the theme of these recommendations is focusing on Washington County. So given the context and challenges of our partner agencies, we want to focus on the items that Washington County can control in the near term. So this would be to study and consider a pilot for the on-demand public transit service, which is that blue kidney that you saw. And that study would allow us to identify best practices and figure out funding options if that service is something that the county decided it would want to pilot. And then we want to continue to prioritize, maintain, and invest in mobility management. So we have a wonderful woman in Washington County Community Services. Her name is Sheila Holbrook White. She does all sorts of mobility management right now for the county, which is really connecting folks to where they need to go. So if they have a court date at the government center, if they need to get to the WIC clinic, but they live in Forest Lake, it's Sheila's job, kind of by plane, by boat, by taxi, by foot, whatever. She helps folks get to where they need to go, because we do know that transit options right now are limited, and folks who are unable or unwilling to drive have very limited options when it comes to transit in the greater Stillwater area. And so with her work, we can kind of continue to invest in that work and also track that data. So when we do bring more transit and more options to the greater Stillwater area, we know that we can really serve those needs because we'll have the numbers behind it. And then let's move to our next slide. So these are our midterm recommendations. And this would be 3 to 5 years out. And this focuses on creating what would be called a Highway 36 Corridor Commission. So this would be a joint powers board of sorts. And this would hopefully be long enough after the COVID-19 pandemic that we would have an understanding of the future of transit and the demand, but also at a time when our partner agencies wouldn't have so many competing transit priorities. So we'd recommend that the commission would identify funding sources, probably be a joint powers board, and then scope out future studies and projects. So as Joe said, we're not advancing the preferred alternative out of this study, but it'd really be up to that corridor commission to commission a study that would kind of identify a preferred alternative, and that would have kind of all of the corridor communities involved, so they would be able to kind of vote and really have their say as the study moves forward. And then we'd also want to work with Metro Transit in St. Croix County on monitoring a need for essentially park and ride service, and seeing, we know that at least pre-pandemic, we had a lot of folks from Wisconsin crossing the river and coming and using our services and using our buses. And they continue to kind of move dirt on the other side of the river and grow quite quickly. So there might be an opportunity once we're 3 to 5 years out from the pandemic that we might want to look to see if there wouldn't be need to capitalize on that investment and get some service out there as well. Let's go to our next slide. And these are our longer term recommendations. And so this would really be when we would develop those corridor plans and focus on those partnerships as well. So we want to do some planning for mobility hubs. Those are kind of one-stop shops within your within a kind of a BRT area or a bus area where you might have a park and ride, you might have electrical vehicle charging, you might have shared bikes or shared scooters. Really all that first mile, last mile trip needs will be met kind of in one area. We'd want to partner with cities and develop small area plans. So if a BRT was brought forward, we'd want to make sure that around the station area, we'd have some great transit access. We know that that's really good for economic development and really kind of supportive of the city. And we want to partner with MnDOT and the Corridor Commission to develop what's called transit advantages. And really those are bus-only shoulders. So we know that as we get out into suburban communities where folks maybe choose to take the transit but don't need to, if we have the time travel savings by using a shoulder, that's quite persuasive in getting those folks out of their cars and into the bus. So those are about 5 to 8 years away, and then we can move into our ongoing strategies or recommendations. And this is really similar to what we're doing right now, is kind of continuing our engagement with our corridor cities. We know this is the first time you all are seeing this, but we want to keep chatting and keep keeping a pulse on what you're hearing and what your needs are. And then we want to keep doing things that we know help to support transit. So that would be partnering with cities and MnDOT when it comes to our bike and ped infrastructure, finding grants, finding good funding opportunities for those. We know that that when an area is bicycle pedestrian friendly, it's also transit friendly. And we know for folks who maybe have a 1-car household or a 0-car household, if we can make it easy for them to bike and walk up to it, they're more likely to access the transit. All good stuff there. And so that's the end of our recommendations, which is just a lot of information to give you. And so I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have, particularly interested in your reactions to bringing more transit to the Oak Park Heights areas, thinking about how what we're showing maybe aligns with what you've heard as city council members, anything you'd like to share with us.
Question, where you're going off of 280, is that following University Avenue by the U and going basically following the light rail line, the green line?
Do you want to go to that scenario, Joe?
I think it's scenario 1 or 2, either one. So does that follow, it comes down 280, so does that follow University Avenue?
It does show that it would follow University on here. What's important to keep in mind is that these are just testing to get a sense of ridership, to get a sense of travel time. So even if, perhaps we were to advance scenario 1, we wouldn't want to get too into the weeds on what roads it's actually following at this point, because they're about 6 phases of study away before we would know the actual alignment of road that it would follow.
Okay, thank you.
I really like this plan. The one thing that I'd like to see, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is personally, with looking at the bus rapid transit, the farther out east, to me, looking at people with working families, with kids, you might have to get back for a family emergency. The further out east that bus rapid transit goes, I think the more likely that will impact families in a good way.
Yes, excellent feedback. Thank you.
I'd say with scenario 1 and scenario 2 would have been very helpful a long time ago when I went to college, because I drove 36-280 to the university every day. So.
I'm sorry, I can't really hear Councilmember Runk.
That's because I shut my mic off. I said scenario 1 and scenario 2 would have been handy a long time ago when I went to college, because I said I used to drive 36-280 every day. So,
Are there any other questions? Well, Emily and Joe, I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation. It was very, very enlightening.
Thank you,
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Kriesel, for spearheading this information for us.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just close my comments by appreciating and thanking City Administrator Eric Johnson, who's represented Oak Park Heights, as staff on the City Technical Advisory Working Group throughout the study. He's provided great input from the Oak Park Heights perspective, and has helped to fine-tune study recommendations. What I'm particularly interested to hear the council's reaction to the concept of on-demand public transit serving or in Oak Park Heights.
I think there's been a real lack for that. I don't even remember how long ago there was a bus that used to go around the city, right. And it was used quite a bit. So I think you're probably having that on demand. I bet you it would be used quite often.
I think so.
Anyone else? Any comments? Looks like you put a lot of work into this and a lot of thought.
Thank you, Mayor Cumber. Emily and Joe are doing a great job leading us through this study. So thank you.
Thank you for your time to come today.
You betcha.
Excellent.
If there's no other comments, then we'll move on to our consent agenda, which is approved bills and investments. Check 66932 to 66972, totaling $250,861.75. And then check 66973 to 67032 in the amount of $397,040.40. Approve city council work session notes from May 25th, 2021. Approve city council minutes from May 25th, 2021. Approve regular premium option for workers' compensation insurance from 7/7/2021 through 7/6/2022. Authorize repairs to the city hall hot water circulating system, and approve proclamation recognizing June 2021 as Small Cities Month.
I make a
Their
motion.
motion,
I'll make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
motion by Councilmember Doherty, second by Councilmember Liljegren. Eric? Roll call.
Councilmember Doherty,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren,
Yes.
Councilmember Runk,
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. And tonight we do have a public hearing. It's a public hearing on a request regarding noise ordinance for a concert at Stillwater Bowl on July 16th, 2021. Jennifer?
Yes, Mayor and Council, Randy Ertl from Stillwater Bowl, who is here present in the council chambers this evening, has filed an application with the city for an outdoor concert on Friday, July 16th, with a rain date of July 18th, and he's requesting the council consider authorizing extension of 1 hour to, for the noise ordinance to allow the concert to go until 11 p.m. That would be a deviation from the noise audibility matter that's in ordinance 1109.04.f.6a. A notice of this public hearing was published in the Stillwater Gazette. It was mailed to neighbors within a 500-foot radius of Stillwater Bowl, and it has been posted at City Hall. The City Council may consider a reasonable deviation under the city special event permitting process for the event to deviate from the noise restrictions. If the City Council does desire to grant that one-time request for this event, staff is recommending that the following conditions be placed on the applicant's permit. That the applicant must provide a security safety plan that is acceptable to the Chief of Police by July 1st, 2021, and that the applicant must provide a forecasted attendance, maximum attendance number to the Chief of Police by July 1st, 2021. The applicant must provide the Chief of Police an updated expected attendance, including actual total ticket sales 5 days prior to the event, with a final updated security plan accounting for the expected attendance. And the plan must include the sold and forecasted continued ticket sales and door sales. That the applicant shall ensure that all designated security personnel are non-drinking and sober that evening. That the city police presence is required if deemed necessary by the Chief of Police, and that such costs are the sole responsibility of the applicant. That a cash deposit of $1,000 be made to ensure payment of above police costs and/or possible penalties stemming from violating the permission granted herein. That all outdoor music and/or operations cease at 11 p.m. and that above ordinances are strictly enforced at 11:01 p.m. That the applicant acknowledges that the city may revoke the permit, if granted, at any time should the event pose any undue risks to the general public.
Well, thank you. I'll open the public hearing. Jennifer, is there anyone there that would like to speak to this request?
Mayor and Council, there is nobody here other than Randy Ertl himself, and we did not receive any written comments as well.
Okay. Does Randy Ertl want to, would he like to say anything regarding this?
No, not really. It's about the same as it's been the last few.
Is that a no?
That is a no. As you recall, he did do this concert in 2019 and 2018, and he's following the similar process this year.
And as I recall, there was no issues with it at that time from the last one.
Correct.
I'll move
Okay,
to
I'm
close the
sorry.
public hearing.
Okay. Motion by Councilmember Runk, second by Councilmember Doherty. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren,
Yes.
Councilmember Runk,
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Council, is there any discussion regarding this request?
My only question, I couldn't recall if there hasn't been any issues with this before, has it?
No,
I didn't think so.
Is the timeline the same as it has been? I
yes.
mean, the 11 o'clock.
Same size crowd and
Pretty
anticipation.
much, it might be a little bigger this
Figure people want to get out.
year.
Yeah.
And you have no problem, this is for Randy, he has no problem with the stipulations that are put down here?
No.
Okay.
I make a motion that we approve the request.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Doherty, second by Councilmember Liljegren. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Okay, we have no old business tonight, so we'll move to new business, which is a joint powers agreement between St. Croix County Sheriffs and the Oak Park Heights Police Department. Chief?
Thank you and good evening, Mayor and Council. So here we are a couple years down the road and we find ourselves as the new gateway into Minnesota with the new bridge opening up. And with that comes with some assistances for public safety from time to time. And we are already finding ourselves crossing the bridge, and as soon as you get to a certain point, you're already committed. Along with that, we're finding calls for service increasing, and as well as maybe not the direct area. I've had conversations with the sheriff. We've kind of gone back and forth a little bit on this JPA, the Joint Powers Agreement. We both agreed, we think it's a good idea that we just more or less solidify this. We already assist each other in the capacity for emergency assistance. It does open the door as well to assist if there's an officer or a deputy over in St. Croix County that's requesting help. We are the closest agency, and we're not going to let our Oak Park squad, that one thing, just sit there and watch on the other side of the river or a mile away from us. And same vice versa, they can come over here, in which they've already done that. 95% of this is going to be bridge related, no question about it. And we've already seen a variety of calls from people in crisis to traffic accidents to debris on the highway. State Patrol, of course, is great if they're in the area, but they are overwhelmed and it is a delayed. So most of this just centers around us stabilizing the situation and waiting for St. Croix County to get there, and vice versa if we need help. And so that's what this Joint Powers Agreement is asking for, basically. Just putting this more obviously together and saying that if we were over there, we're responsible for our own people, and vice versa as they are for theirs. And there's no question. So that's what I'm asking for, the approval of this tonight from council.
Seems
And
pretty
Chief,
logical.
one more thing here. The version of the contract that's in your packet is actually somewhat outdated. There was a lot of back and forth with St. Croix County to try to get a workable agreement in place that made sense to staff over in St. Croix County as well as staff in Oak Park Heights. But then, and as you can see in your packet, the St. Croix County was clearly comfortable with it and they went ahead and signed it. But then kind of right at the same time, Chief ran the proposed draft of the contract by the League of Minnesota Cities with respect to insurance related issues and insurance claims under this sort of contract. And the league actually had a handful of proposed changes that they thought made sense, particularly from their perspective on insurance related lawsuits, claims and lawsuits that might stem out of such an arrangement. Primarily, I think the change, if you're looking at the contract that's in your packet, the second page of the agreement, numbered paragraph 5, the league basically, so under paragraph 5 of this agreement, we had drafted this in a way that essentially said Oak Park Heights and St. Croix County are each going to be responsible for their own conduct in response to any sort of joint call. And if someone sues either one or both of them, that basically each one is going to be responsible for any liability that comes out of their respective officers' actions in such a scene. But the league suggested that somewhat different provision that essentially would call for whatever party has requested assistance to take full responsibility for whatever happens on that scene from a legal claims perspective, including, so for example, if St. Croix County were to make a request for assistance over in Wisconsin and our officers went over there and then some sort of unfortunate incident occurred that resulted in a lawsuit being filed against St. Croix County and or the city from those officers' actions, that essentially St. Croix County as the jurisdiction where the issue happened and the party requesting assistance, they would be fully responsible under their insurance policy provisions to deal with that claim. And so the league recommended that primarily so that there would be only one insurance policy involved in any particular lawsuit and stemming out of a particular event. And also that the result would be then that a single lawyer working for that insurance company and that entity could represent both parties in that lawsuit. And so the league recommended that. They thought it made sense to them and was preferable from their perspective. And so we have reworked the language in section 5 to account for that. And I think, Chief, have you sent that on to St. Croix County at this point?
If they have it, we've been playing phone tag today, but we have not made verbal connection today on it.
And I certainly could screen share that revised red line version that's been kicked around that the league has recommended. But essentially what we'd like to do is, and let me see if I can pull it up here from my file.
So are you advising that we should table this to the next meeting, or?
Well, what we were going to advise, what staff thought made sense was if the council's comfortable with it, even though these red line versions have not been approved by St. Croix County with a handful of changes from the league, essentially this council could approve it conditionally subject to St. Croix County agreeing that the format of it with those changes are acceptable to St. Croix County. And that way we're not kind of holding up the approval process of this. I think the chief wants to get it done and in place. And so the short of it being, I'll go ahead and screen share what this revised version looks like.
I would think with the league being our insurance trust, that if that's the language that they're requesting, I would think we should be comfortable with what their suggestions are.
So can everybody see my screen at this point?
Yes.
And so we're looking at the red line version of the contract here. And what we see is a handful of changes in paragraph 4 and paragraph 5, which essentially relate to legal claims and who's responsible for what. And what this red line version provides is that each party is still going to be each party will be responsible for their own workers' compensation claims for their employees. And so that's made clear in this section 4 that if our officer gets hurt responding over in St. Croix County for some incident, we're still going to be responsible from a workers' compensation perspective. But again, the main claim basically being section 5 being deleted in its entirety with a new version of language recommended by the league. And again, essentially saying that whatever parties requested assistance, their insurance policy and their entity will be responsible for the legal claim that arises out of that. And then there's one additional paragraph as well, again, at the very end, recommended by the league. And this is an additional provision that essentially, under the original concept of this agreement, there would not be any charge going one way or the other. When one party requests assistance from the other, it's basically each party's paying for their own staff, their own equipment to help out the other party, and there's not going to be a reimbursement. But what the league pointed out is, well, if there's some major natural disaster and FEMA comes into play, then FEMA has reimbursement rules that go along with it. And essentially, if there was some natural disaster or we had to go over to Wisconsin and provide assistance, and FEMA came into play, then technically under FEMA rules, St. Croix County would have to, or we'd have to invoice St. Croix County, and then St. Croix County can request reimbursement through FEMA. And so what this says is for major disasters lasting longer than 8 hours, a party is going to be able to bill the other party for assistance being provided. And again, that's primarily for FEMA reimbursement purposes. So with those changes, if the council is comfortable with those red lines, what we'd recommend is a conditional approval of that agreement, subject to St. Croix County's review and any minor tweaks by staff that arise out of that.
Did they get specific about what is a disaster? Is it natural disasters?
It's not specific, and in fact, it doesn't even say natural disasters. It really just says any sort of event that requires assistance for more than 8 hours, 8 continuous hours. And
Okay.
so it wouldn't have even technically necessarily have to relate to any disaster. If there's just some really major event that is going to require police assistance for hours and hours on end, there's a potential for reimbursement there going each way. But if it's less than 8 hours, the expectation will be that each party just is going to basically providing assistance for free.
Okay.
So basically on those changes, they go both ways. We request their
It
assistance.
goes both ways, that they're mutual provisions, that it just depends on which side of the river things are happening on and who's requesting assistance from whom, but it's completely mutual in terms of the benefits and detriments that occur under this contract.
I'd make a motion then that we accept the joint powers agreement with the changes laid out by the attorney and other minor tweaks that may be needed to get the thing signed.
I'll second that.
Motion by Councilmember Doherty, second by Councilmember Runk. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Next is Trail Connection, Norwich Parkway from Autumn Hills neighborhood. All of you have seen the letter that I received from Teddy C. Bright and met with him and his family up at City Hall. And he gave me a description, and the chief was there as well, of what his request was. And you see the map inside as to where the potential problem is. And it's adding a safety crossing coming from the Autumn Bridge neighborhood, going to Autumn Hills Park. And staff has looked at this and putting in a crosswalk there, you know, with the connections and everything that we've had in other places. And the cost is estimated to be about $7,000 to put in, you know, the flashing, you know, pedestrian crossing type thing. And we do have money in the park dedication fund for that, and considering that it's a new trail connection, so to speak, that it could be covered under that. And I'd suggest putting it in because that, you know, that is right where the entrance to the park is, and that's where cars are pulling in and pulling out. So I would suggest going ahead with this.
I really love location X. I think a lot of people that go and use that trail then go and make that connection and cross in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's one or the other, I would highly recommend looking at X. But I love the idea.
I do too. And I just think it is really wonderful that a young man who's 5 years old was so innovative to come up with this idea and bring it up to City Hall and meet with us.
And he had so much fun up at City Hall. He was telling me all about it.
I was gonna say, did
He went
you
on a
walk?
tour to the police department, and they found the candy drawer.
Did he
Wasn't
take a
my
walk
candy
across the street to talk to his neighbor across the cul-de-sac?
He told me
Charlie?
all about it when he was biking around. Yeah.
Well, they had a good time, and it was just delightful to have them come up and be so assertive.
My question,
Well,
Go ahead. Mike.
question I have is, what are we talking about doing here? I mean, talking about putting in a crosswalk is one thing, but now I'm hearing flashing lights and that, and I'm like,
Well, Andy has taken a look at this and has come up with some suggestions as to what would be there, you know, potentially like what we've done with, you know, on 58th Street, say by Nova Scotia, where there's a crosswalk
Right.
there that you can see.
I would say if we're going to add any lights anywhere, I'd almost put it down further past the pond near the townhomes, because then you have that curve and you also have individuals that might need the additional time more than right at the park entrance. But I like the idea of looking at that.
I'm going to defer to Andy Kegley and his staff because they know where the locations will be, but they have the idea of where the crosswalk or the crossing should be.
Perfect.
I think I could go, at this point, I could go for, let's put the crosswalk in, and we'll look at the lights and then at a later time.
Is that a motion?
Sure.
I'll second.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Rung, second by Councilmember Johnson. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Okay, now we have approved purchase agreement for city-owned property located at 5416 Stagecoach Trail. Eric?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As your last conversation was in closed session about this topic, staff could not move forward with getting a purchase agreement signed relative to the property at 5416 Stagecoach Trail. But we did take that feedback. We received, did communicate back with our contracted realtor, Mr. Zeller, and outlined the price of $150,000 with the additional conditions noted in the report that basically requires the buyer to produce an application to you by September 1st with potential approval and closing by December 31st, which would include a developer's agreement and all the expectations of connection fees, or I should say that, a site plan review and some of the more typical planning reviews. This is not significantly unlike your process with the potential hotel a couple of years back with that buyer. City basically wants to know what the developer is proposing, and the sale is contingent on that plan. So Kevin was kind enough to help develop this language and communicate with Mr. Zeller, and I think you've got a good product. In terms of the purchase agreement terms, it gives him some time to develop those concepts. Doesn't make him do it in 30 days, but it gives him some reasonable timeline. And if you think this is acceptable, we'll have it executed, and the developer will be tasked to give us a plan.
It's nice to see that land finally getting some movement on it. Any questions from the council regarding this? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Liljegren, second by Councilmember Doherty. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Then we have the American Rescue Plan Act resolution to accept and direct funding. Eric?
Thank you, Mayor and Council again. As we talked about in your work session, the city will be receiving approximately $525,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act over the next 2 years or so. We do have a timeline to spend those dollars, and as those dollars come forward to us as a city, it's helpful for staff, and I think everybody outlined where those dollars would be targeted. The resolution outlines a number of specific things, including allocations to the Chamber, Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Youth Service Bureau, Valley Outreach, Community Thread, some commitments to your staff who did a fantastic job in looking back and during the pandemic, but ultimately the largest allocation of the lion's share of the dollars would be to your water meter replacement. All these funds do have pretty significant restrictions compared to past funds received in terms of the COVID COVID money from last year. So the language is a guide for us, and if something changes, we'd come back to you, but this really helps staff target where those dollars are coming in. With that, we ask for approval of the plan.
Is there any discussion about the recommendations?
No, I move approval of the resolution.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Johnson, second by Councilmember Runk. Eric?
Excuse me, Councilmember Runk?
Yes?
I apologize. Councilmember Doherty?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren?
Yes.
There we go. Councilmember Runk?
Yes.
Mayor McCumber?
Yes. And then I
Mayor,
accidentally missed,
Did we strike?
I missed one.
Did you, you
Yeah,
missed D.
Want to go back to approve resolution supporting submission to the state of Minnesota for funding in the upcoming 2022 bonding bill for the XL Energy King plant. Eric?
Oh, yes, Mayor Council. So as the city is actively pursuing bonding dollars for redevelopment opportunities at the LNS King plant, part of that process is the submission to the Office of Management and Budget for inclusion in the 2022 bonding bill. They do have a fairly extensive submission requirement about what those plans need to include and cost estimates. Those additional requirements outline that a resolution is required by the council to clarify its support for the application. In this round, we're asking for $4.6 million to basically extend the utilities largely to the perimeter of the site. And in the packet, you do have a memo from Stantec and very high level images of where those utilities would go. Although not exact, but would they be a very preliminary feasibility study, for lack of a better word. So the obligation the city has is to pass a resolution. It does not commit the city to any internal or self-funding portions of this. You recall the Norrell roundabout, the city did have in its resolution a local match. It's always encouraged, but considering you're losing 35% of your tax base, one of the provisions we're asking for at the end of the day is going to be waive that local match consideration, if not requirement. And that is going to be part of the application. So what we're asking for is you to approve this resolution, and we would then forward this to our friends at the state.
Thank you. Is there any discussion regarding the resolution? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Liljegren, second by Councilmember Johnson. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Liljegren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. And set closed session for discussion of acquisition of property. Councilmember Runk.
Yeah, at their last, well, when the agenda came out for the last school board meeting, they, one of the items was the fact that they were gonna have a couple of what they deemed excess properties that they were gonna put up for sale, one being the Withrow School, but the other one being about 3 acres that they own in the Kern Center. Now, this property originally was given to the school district by Mrs. Kern at one time. And the school district apparently had looked using it for several things over the time, and they found that it really wasn't workable for them because of the size and the fact that part of it is encumbered by the fact that there's power lines over it. I said, when I saw this, I said, I thought about the fact that since it's a piece of property that currently is not drawing any taxes to us anyway, and we've looked for a location for a possible third well, and at times the council have looked at sites like down near Valley View Park and that, but the problem down there was the fact that the plume from Lake Elmo and Bay Township. But this would be out to the west, and we currently have a piece of property out there, but that's a piece of property that we'd just as soon get back onto the tax rolls. And this would be a piece of property that we'd be able to acquire. And I know I talked with Andy Kegley, and then I talked with Eric about it. And in fact, then I also talked to Councilman Liljegren, who, in very basic terms that even I could understand, explained how it works and how the draw area works. And I think that this would be a very good long-term investment for us to buy this piece of property. And the fact that it would serve a purpose, it wouldn't reduce our tax base in any way, and it would solve a long-term problem that we have. But in order to do this, we'd have to have a closed session of the council, namely to discuss strategy, price. I know at the meeting that the school board, that Mr. Drummerhausen, who was the person that was giving the presentation, said that they actually had a assessment. I mean, I'm trying to come up with the right word. The appraisal on the property, so they kind of know where they are, and we'd kind of have to figure out how much it would be worth to us and have our staff kind of look at it to make sure that it would function. So I'd like to set up a closed session of the council sometime that was convenient.
Are you talking a virtual closed session, or, our next council meeting, or prior to that?
I'm thinking that we'd probably we don't meet for another 5 weeks. So I'm thinking that maybe we could move up and have it, the dates I had were possibly the 13th, which would have been when we normally would have met. One other thing was, I know I talked to Eric about the possibility of talking with Betty, because we have some budget issues that we were going to deal with on the 27th. And the other thing is, Councilmember Johnson is here, and the 27th happens to be when our next scheduled meeting happens to be when she's taking her bar exam. So I thought for that convenience, if we could move it up to either the 13th or the 20th, move the council meeting to either the 13th and the 20th, and then have a closed session at that time also to deal with this issue.
I would have a conflict on the 13th now, unless it's an earlier meeting or something.
I won't be in town either the 13th or the 20th.
Well, is there anything else we can?
The 21st would work for me.
Well, then we can just stay with the 22nd if we're going to do the 21st. So you're going to
stay with the 27th, you mean?
What do I was going to say, yeah, okay, 21st.
Consoles, yeah, I could do the 21st, the Wednesday.
My schedule flipped. How about that, Chuck?
21st would work for me, yeah.
Would work for me as well.
Mayor?
Can you give me just 1 second? I'll be right back.
Okay.
I just need to double check, okay?
Everybody's got to check their calendars, okay.
Hey, Jordan, this is working pretty well, I think, so far.
This is working better than I expected.
Yeah.
Oh, now it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah. That's part of my plan, Chuck. You know?
Only thing I noticed was like when Jenny was speaking, and that the mic kind of went in and out.
Went in and out. Yep.
Oh.
But I don't know if it affected them.
I could hear it too. It sounded like there was like, I don't know, I could hear it too. I didn't know if it was going in and out or.
I didn't notice on this end.
Okay, good.
Good. And you can hear us well?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So you're saying Wednesday, the 21st?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's what.
Yep.
That should be fine.
Okay, do we want to have the closed session at 5 o'clock and then the regular meeting at? Well, no, let's put the closed session after the meeting because we'll meet with Betty at 5 o'clock.
Right.
So we'll have a workshop for finance. I'll make this a motion that we move the meeting to July 21st, that we meet at 5 o'clock with the finance staff and staff to deal with budget issues and workshop. That our regular meeting would then be at 6 o'clock, and at the conclusion of the regular meeting, we would have a closed session to deal with the real estate item. That makes
I'll
sense
second that
there,
motion.
Kevin?
Okay, motion by Councilmember Runk, second by Councilmember Johnson to move everything till the 21st. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Are there any other council items or announcements?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Runk, second by Councilmember Liljegren. Eric?
Councilmember Doherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yes.
Councilmember Runk.
Yes.
Mayor McCumber.
Yes. Well, have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good job. Good. Went well.